The first time she came back, she didn't knock, didn't call, didn't send one of those careful little texts people send when they're about to reopen something they broke. She just walked into the diner at 11:40 on a Tuesday night, shook the rain out of her hair, and sat down in the one booth I hadn't let anyone use in 6 years. Booth 4, back corner under the window that never sealed right, the one that hums when the wind comes off the lake. I'd told every regular in town it had a busted heater vent. I'd told the new waitress it was reserved for a private party so many times she'd stopped asking. I had built an entire quiet mythology around an empty table just so I'd never have to watch someone who wasn't her sitting in it. And then the bell over the door went off, and there she was, folding herself into it like she'd never left. My name is Elias Vance. I'm 34. I own the Cedar Street Diner, which is a generous word for a 12-stool, 6-booth room that my father ran before me and his father ran before him. And I have spent most of my adult life becoming very good at two things: patching a fryer that should have been replaced in 2011, and not thinking about Nora Bell. I was extremely bad at the second one. For the record, I was not doing anything dignified when she walked in. I was standing at the counter eating cold fries out of the basket, because closing alone means dinner is whatever didn't sell, and I had a dish towel over my shoulder and flour on my forearm from a pie crust that hadn't gone the way I wanted. If you'd told me that this was the version of me the universe was going to hand her after 6 years, I'd have at least washed my hands. She looked up, rain on her coat, tired around the eyes, a suitcase by her knee that told me everything and nothing. "You're still here," she said. And I, master of the spoken word, keeper of the family legacy, 34 years old, said, "It's a diner. Where would it go?" Let me back up, because you deserve to understand what you're watching before you decide whether I'm a romantic or an idiot. Most nights the vote splits. Nora and I grew up 4 houses apart on the same flood-prone street. Her mother waited tables for my father. My father taught Nora how to pour coffee without looking at the cup when she was 11, which is a skill she still has and I still don't. We were the kind of childhood friends that small towns manufacture and then quietly expect to marry. Nobody ever said it out loud. That was the problem. We built a whole future on the word obviously, and it turns out you can't build anything on that. Booth 4 was ours before it was a shrine. We did homework there. She taught me to hate math there. I taught her that if you order a grilled cheese and ask my dad to put a fried egg in it, he'll pretend to be offended and then do it every time. She had a chipped yellow mug she claimed as hers when she was 14. Ugly, honestly. Mustard-colored, a hairline crack running up one side like a river on a map. And she drank her coffee out of it with so much sugar it barely qualified as coffee. Coffee is a delivery system for sugar, she used to say, every time, like it was scripture. And she used to steal my fries and call it a tax. Then we were 19. She got into a design program 1,100 miles away, and I had a father whose hands had started shaking too much to run a fry station, and the future we'd built on obviously met the future that was actually arriving, and they did not survive the collision. I want to be honest with you, because this is the part I've rewritten in my head about 4,000 times. She didn't leave me. That's the story the town tells, and it's cleaner than the truth. The truth is she asked me to come. Stood right out front under the sign my grandfather hung, rain coming down just like tonight, and she said, "Come with me, we'll figure the rest out." And I, steady, reliable, responsible Elias, I looked at my father's shaking hands and this room full of my family's ghosts, and I said the most cowardly, noble thing a person can say. I said, "I can't." but you should go." I told myself I was being selfless, letting her fly, not clipping her wings with a fry basket and a mortgage. None of it was true. I was afraid that if I went with her, I'd find out I wasn't enough for the bigger life. Staying meant I never had to find out. So she went, and I stayed. And I kept her booth empty, and her ugly mug on the shelf, and I told everyone it was sentiment. It wasn't sentiment. It was a door I refused to close. "You gonna stand there holding a towel," she said, "or are you gonna feed me? I've been driving since Kansas." See, this is the thing about Nora. 6 years, no warning, a suitcase full of whatever she was running from, and her opening move is to give me a hard time. That's how I knew it was really her, and not one of the versions of her I'd invented to keep myself company. The invented ones were always softer. The real one had teeth. "We're closed," I said. "The sign says open." The sign is a liar. It's been open since 1962, and it's been closed most of that time. Elias. She folded her hands on the table. The mug wasn't there yet. It was on the shelf where it always was, but I watched her eyes go to the empty ring of light where it should be, and I watched her decide not to say anything about it. "I will pay full price for a grilled cheese I could make myself in the microwave. Please." I should have asked why she was here. Any sane man asks why. Why now? Why like this? Why, after 6 years of a silence so complete, I'd started to think of it as a physical object I lived inside. A sane man gets answers before he turns the grill back on. I turned the grill back on. "Fried egg in it?" I asked, with my back to her, because I couldn't do the next part looking at her face. There was a long pause. The griddle ticked as it heated. The bad window hummed. "You remember that," she said. Quiet, the teeth gone out of it. "I remember everything," I said, which was more honest than I meant to be, so I ruined it on purpose. "It's a small menu." She laughed. God, I'd forgotten what it did to a room. 6 years I'd been running a diner in the specific silence of a place that used to have her laugh in it, and I hadn't known how heavy that silence was until it lifted for 1 second. I made her the grilled cheese with the egg in it. I reached up without deciding to and took the yellow mug off the shelf, and I filled it with coffee and put 4 sugars in it, because my hands knew the number, even if I'd have sworn I'd forgotten. And I set it down in front of her in booth 4. She looked at the mug. She looked at me. Something moved across her face like weather. "You kept it," she said. "It was in the way," I said. "I keep meaning to throw it out." We both knew that was the biggest lie I'd told in 6 years, and neither of us said so. And that's how I knew we were really going to do this. Whatever this was going to be. Here's what I learned over the next hour, in the order she let me have it, which was not the order that made sense. She was back because her mother's house had finally sold, and there were boxes to deal with. The practical reason. The one she led with, the one that let her pretend this was logistics. Her mother had passed 2 winters ago. I'd sent flowers to an address 1,100 miles away and gotten a card back in handwriting I'd have known anywhere. 3 words, "Thank you, Eli." And I'd carried that card in my wallet for 4 months like an idiot before I made myself put it in a drawer. She was back because the design career had happened. Actually happened. She was good. She had a title and a city apartment and a life with the kind of straight, clean lines she used to draw in the margins of my math homework. And she was back. This part came last, near midnight, after the second refill, when the sugar and the exhaustion had worn her defenses down to the honest layer. Because 3 weeks ago she had been standing in that clean-lined apartment realizing she'd built the entire bigger life and forgotten to put a single thing in it that she actually loved. I kept waiting to feel like I'd arrived, she said, turning the yellow mug in a slow circle on the table. Everybody said once you get there, you'll feel it. So I got there. I got everywhere. And I kept standing in these beautiful rooms feeling like I was house-sitting my own life. I didn't say anything. I've learned that the most useful thing I own isn't the diner. It's the ability to shut up and let a person get all the way to the end of a sentence they've been afraid to finish. And then Mom's house sold, she said, and I told myself I'd come deal with the boxes and drive back Sunday. Clean, in and out. She looked up at me. And I've been in town 4 hours, and I drove past this place 6 times before I let myself stop. 6 times, I said. Don't. I'm just saying, that's a lot of gas. Elias. There's a station 2 blocks over. I'd have covered it, old time's sake. She threw a balled-up napkin at me, and it bounced off my chest, and she laughed again. And this time the laugh had something wet in it, something that wasn't entirely a laugh, and I felt the whole careful architecture of the last 6 years start to make a sound like ice on a lake in spring. I want to tell you, we fell straight back into it. That would be a better story, and a shorter one. But I'm the man who kept a booth empty for 6 years rather than risk finding out what would happen if I filled it. And you don't rewire that kind of caution in one rainy Tuesday. So instead, we made a rule. It was her idea, which tells you she was as scared as I was. Okay, she said, at midnight, when I finally sat down across from her in booth 4. The first time I'd let myself sit in that booth since she left, and my body felt it, sitting down there, like stepping into a photograph. Here's the deal. I'm here for a week, maybe 2. I have to go back. I have a lease, I have a job, I have a whole life that isn't a grilled cheese with an egg in it. She said that part like it cost her something. So we can't do the thing where we pretend 6 years didn't happen and fall off a cliff and then I leave and it wrecks us both again. I can't do that to you. I won't. Generous of you, I said, assuming I'd fall off a cliff. Elias, you kept my mug. Fair. So what's the rule? I said. We're friends. She said it firmly, like a woman nailing a board over a window before a storm. We're old friends and I'm in town and you feed me because you're a soft touch, and that's it. No, she gestured vaguely between us, at the air, at the 6 years, at the mug. Know that. We keep it on the ground. We don't start something I have to end. And here's the thing about rules like that. Here's what she and I both knew and neither of us admitted while we shook on it across a chipped formica table at midnight. A rule is only ever necessary for the thing it's forbidding. You don't promise not to fall for someone unless you're already falling. The rule wasn't stopping anything. We both knew that. We shook on it anyway. Deal, I said, and shook her hand, and held it about 1 second too long. And we both noticed. And neither of us said anything, and the bad window hummed. She came in every night that week. That was not part of the rule. The rule, strictly interpreted, did not require her to appear at the diner at closing time 7 nights running, sit in booth 4, and keep me company while I cleaned the fry station. The rule certainly did not require her to start showing up before closing, around 9, with a box of her mother's things she didn't want to deal with alone, so that we ended up going through a dead woman's life together over cold coffee. Nora reading out old grocery lists in her mom's handwriting. Me finding a photo of my father and her mother at some town dance in 1988, both of them young and laughing in a way I'd never seen either of them laugh in life. They should have just gone for it, Nora said, holding that photo up to the light. Maybe they were scared, I said. Of what? Look at them. of finding out it wouldn't be as good as looking at each other across a room and wondering. She went quiet, set the photo down, turned the yellow mug in its slow circle. "That's a very specific fear to have thought about," she said. "I run a diner alone in a town where nothing happens," I said. "I've had time to think about a lot of specific fears." I was flirting with the edge of the rule, and we both knew it. She let it sit there for a second, dangerous. And then she picked up a napkin and threw it at me, which was becoming our whole language. The thing she did when I got too close to the truth, deflect and throw. It was the most tender thing in the world, that napkin. It meant, "You got me, and I'm not ready, and don't stop." Here is a partial inventory of the things I noticed that week, because noticing Nora Bell is the one thing I have always been genuinely gifted at. I noticed she still hummed when she was trying not to cry, did it over a box of her mother's recipe cards, 3 bars of a song neither of us could have named. And I pretended not to hear, because that's what you do. I noticed she'd learned to take her coffee with less sugar, 3 instead of the old 4, a small city correction. And I noticed that on the 4th night she asked for 4 again and didn't explain it, and I didn't ask. I noticed she'd stopped wearing the sharp, clean-lined clothes by midweek and started showing up in an old sweatshirt I was fairly sure had been her mother's. I noticed she never once sat anywhere but booth 4. And I noticed, the way you notice the temperature drop before you understand it's going to rain, that every single night she stayed a little later, and every single night the leaving got a little harder, and that we were both, very quietly, and against the explicit terms of a handshake agreement, falling right off the cliff she'd made me promise we wouldn't jump off. It was the 5th night that the rule cracked. Not broke, cracked. There's a difference, and she'd have wanted me to be precise about it. The rain had come back hard, the real spring kind that makes the whole town sound like it's under a waterfall, and the power flickered the way it does out here when the wind gets into the old lines. We were in booth 4. The overheads buzzed and died and came back, buzzed and died, and finally just died, and left us in the amber light of the one emergency bulb over the register and the neon of the sign bleeding pink through the wet window. And in that light, Nora looked at me across the table. 6 years and 1,100 miles, and 1 dead mother, and 1 sold house, and 1 clean-lined life all sitting on the formica between us. And she said, very softly, no teeth in it at all, "Why didn't you ever come find me, Eli? In 6 years, not once." And I could have deflected. God knows I'm good at it. I could have said gas money, or small menu, or thrown a napkin. The whole week had been the 2 of us building a fort out of jokes so we wouldn't have to stand in the open. But she'd asked me straight, in the dark, with the rain coming down exactly like the night she left. And I was so tired of the fort. "Because I told you to go," I said. I made myself keep going. And a man doesn't get to tell you to go, and then come dragging you back the second he can't stand it. That's not love. That's changing your mind and calling it destiny. She didn't move. "You went and built something, Nora. You did the brave thing. I did the safe thing, and put a nice coat on it, and called it noble. The least I owed you was to not show up 1,100 miles away, and make my cowardice your problem." The neon hummed. She stared at me. "That is," she said slowly, "the single most Elias thing I have ever heard in my life. Thank you." "It wasn't a compliment, you idiot." And her voice broke on idiot, cracked clean in half, and the tears she'd been humming down all week finally came up over the edge. "You think I built something? Eli, I built a set. I built a beautiful set of a life so that when I stood in it, I could pretend the reason I was so hollow was that I hadn't gotten far enough yet. And the whole time, the actual thing, the real thing, was standing in a diner in the rain, telling me to go be brave without him. Nora, you were supposed to fight for me. She wasn't yelling. That was the worst part. She said it quiet and wrecked, turning that ugly yellow mug in a circle so fast the cold coffee slopped over the crack in the side. Just once. I needed one person in my whole life to look at me and decide I was worth the inconvenient version of things. And it was always going to be you. It was only ever going to be you. And you told me to go. And there it was. The story the town told, the story I'd told myself, the one where I nobly set her free, gone in a sentence. I hadn't set her free. I'd let her go so I wouldn't have to risk her. And she'd spent 6 years thinking it meant she wasn't worth the trouble. I'm going to break the rule now, I said. Elias, you made a rule about not starting something. I'm not going to start something. I reached across booth 4 and I put my hand over hers, over the mug, stilling it, stopping the slow, desperate circle of it. I'm going to finish something. Something I should have finished 6 years ago and was too scared to. There's a difference, and you'd want me to be precise about it. She let out a sound that was half a sob and half that laugh, the one that changed the whole room. That's not fair, she whispered, using my own thing on me. I noticed you, I said. That's the only talent I've got. I noticed you took your coffee with 3 sugars all week, and then on the 4th night, you went back to 4. She went still. You want to know why I never came to find you? Fine. Here's the real answer. No code on it. I made myself say it. Because if I got on a plane and showed up at your door, you'd have had to choose. Right there. Me or the life. And I would rather have kept an empty booth and an ugly mug for the rest of my life than be the thing that made you choose smaller. The rain came down. I didn't stay away because I stopped, Nora. I stayed away because I never once stopped. And I didn't trust myself to want you and let you be free at the same time. The neon bled pink across her face. Ask me to stay, she said. That's against your rule. Elias Vance, I am revoking the rule. I am tearing up the rule. Ask me to stay, or so help me I will throw this mug at your head, and it's the only thing in this room I'd actually miss. So I did. I'm not going to tell you exactly what I said, because some things a man gets to keep for himself, and I'd been keeping the wrong things for 6 years, and I wanted, just once, to keep the right one. But I asked her. In the dark, in the rain, in the booth we used to share, with my flour-dusted hand over hers, I asked the woman I'd let walk away to walk back. And she said yes. And then, because it was us, and because we are physically incapable of a clean emotional moment, she added, "But I'm keeping my job. We're doing the long-distance thing until I figure out how to work from here. And you are getting that fryer replaced, because I am not marrying into a grease fire." Who said anything about marrying? I said. I did. Just now. Keep up. You'd think that's the end. Rain, confession, the girl comes home. Roll credits. But I promised you honesty. And the honest thing is that the past doesn't dissolve just because you finally say the true thing out loud. The past gets on a plane. 3 days later, a man walked into my diner at lunchtime, and I knew before he opened his mouth that he belonged to the life Nora was untangling herself from. You can just tell. He had the clean lines. He had a watch that cost more than my fryer, replaced or not. He looked at booth 4, where Nora was sitting with a laptop, working remote for the first time, her mother's sweatshirt on, and the yellow mug at her elbow. And something in his face said he'd driven a long way to say something he'd rehearsed. His name was Grant. He was, it turned out, the almost. Not a husband, not a fiancé, but the man from the clean-lined life who'd assumed, the way I'd once assumed, that obviously was a foundation you could build on. He'd found out she'd left. He'd come to bring her back to the set. "Nora," he said, "you didn't return my calls. You drove to Ohio, to a diner." He said diner the way you'd say a word you'd found on the bottom of your shoe. And I stood behind my counter with a dish towel over my shoulder, and I did the hardest thing I've ever done, which was nothing. I didn't come out swinging. I didn't stake a claim. Because 6 years ago I'd made her choose by not letting her choose, and I was not going to be a man who fought for her like she was territory. If she was going to stay, she was going to stay because she chose booth 4 with her eyes open, not because I won a standoff in front of the pie case. So I let her answer. She closed the laptop. She stood up. And she said the thing I will hear in my head on my deathbed. "Grant, you're a good person, and you came all this way, and I'm sorry, because I know what it costs to drive somewhere hoping." She glanced at me when she said that, one flick of the eyes, and I had to look at the register real hard for a second. But I spent 3 years with you standing in beautiful rooms, feeling like I was house-sitting my life. And I've been in this ugly diner for 1 week, and I feel like I live here, in my whole body, for the first time since I was 19. She picked up the yellow mug. "You want to know the difference between you and him? You never once noticed which mug was mine." Grant left. I won't pretend I was gracious about how glad I was. I gave him a coffee to go, on the house, in a paper cup, and I did not put 4 sugars in it, and that is the pettiest thing I have ever done, and I regret nothing. Nora didn't drive back that Sunday. She drove back 3 weeks later, but only to end the lease and pack the apartment, and I went with her. Got someone to cover the diner for 4 days. The first 4 days I'd taken off in longer than I want to admit. And I stood in those clean-lined, beautiful rooms she'd told me about, and she was right. They were beautiful, and they felt like a set. And we filled a truck and drove 1,100 miles home, with the yellow mug wrapped in a sweatshirt on the seat between us so it wouldn't crack any worse than it already had. And somewhere around Indiana, she fell asleep against the window with her hand on my arm. And I drove through the dark thinking about how the whole time I'd been keeping that booth empty like a wound. I'd been telling myself it was for her. It wasn't for her. She didn't know it existed. I kept that booth empty for 6 years. For me. As long as it sat there empty, the door was open. And as long as the door was open, I hadn't really lost her. Turns out, if you keep a door open long enough, someone might walk back through it. It just takes being too stubborn and too heartbroken to ever nail it shut. That was 2 years ago. Nora works from a desk we built into the back corner of the diner, 10 feet from booth 4, and she designs things for people in cities she used to think she needed to live in. The fryer got replaced. She was right about the grease fire, which I will admit under oath and nowhere else. Her mother's recipe cards are laminated and clipped above the griddle, and the town dance grilled cheese, the one my father used to make her mother, the fried egg one, is on the menu now under the name the 1988. and it outsells everything, and no one but us knows why. We got married in booth 4. Just us, the pastor, and Nora's insistence that a real wedding venue was a set and she was done with sets. She wore her mother's sweatshirt over the dress for the photos after, because it was raining. Of course it was raining. It's always raining in the parts of my life that matter. Last week I was closing up alone. She'd gone home ahead of me, and I took the yellow mug down off the shelf to wash it, and I turned it over in my hands, that ugly mustard color, that river map crack running up the side, and I found something I'd never noticed in 20 years of noticing everything. 1.0 seconds. On the bottom, in nail polish, in the handwriting of a 14-year-old girl, so worn I'd have missed it if the light hadn't caught it just right. It said, Nora's, Elias, hands off. She'd claimed it at 14. She'd written my name on the bottom of it, warning me off 20 years ago. And I'd been guarding that mug like a relic for 6 years of her absence, and never once turned it over to find out my name was already on the underside of her whole life. I brought it home. I set it on the nightstand. When she asked why, I said it was in the way at the diner. I keep meaning to throw it out. She looked at the mug. She looked at me. Something moved across her face like weather. Neither of us said anything. 1.0 seconds. That's the thing about the quiet kind. We don't say it. We just stay. So let me ask you, if someone you'd let walk away 6 years ago came back and sat down like no time had passed, would you have turned the grill back on? Or would you have asked why first, the way a sane person would? 1.0 seconds. And have you ever kept a door open long after you should have nailed it shut? A booth, a mug, a name in your phone you can't delete, just in case. Tell me about the thing you couldn't let go of. I read every one. If this story stayed with you, subscribe and stay a while. Because around here, we tell stories about the ones who stayed. I'll see you in the next one.